What do you do if you're retiring, if you're age 70, and if you have nothing saved for retirement? Stay with me. So I looked up statistics on this, and at age 50, about 20% of Americans, one in five, have zero saved for retirement. Now, in my work now, I don't really encounter people in this situation, but when I was starting out as a financial advisor, occasionally I would encounter someone who, at the age of 70, had nothing saved for retirement. And as a working financial advisor, there really wasn't anything I could do for them at that point. They really weren't suitable to become a client. But I would always give the person a benefit of a half an hour meeting to maybe act as a thought partner to figure out what they could reasonably do with what they have to make a retirement. Now, I'm going to share some ideas and thoughts with you. I hope you're not in this situation, but if you are in this situation, I understand. A lot of times when people end up with zero saved for retirement at age 70, they had a retirement account at some point. Sometimes something happened, an illness, they lost their home, or something catastrophic happened, and the money that was in their 401k or that was saved for retirement often went towards that disaster, or they saved for years and years. And I had one person who was scammed out of their money. So sometimes it's just not for lack of savings. It's just life happens. And sometimes people end up in the unenviable position of having zero at age 70. So let's talk about some ideas if you are in that situation or if you know someone in that situation. But hopefully, if you're younger, if you're in your 40s or in your 50s, you want to, of course, avoid this situation at all cost. So the first thing I would tell a person is, if at all possible, you're going to have to keep working. It could be a part-time job, it could be a full-time job. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate, but you're going to need income coming into the home. And some people at age 70 are fortunate enough to find work. About 18% of people age 70 and over are still working. Some of those people are voluntarily still working, and some of those people, unfortunately, are not, if at all possible. And I certainly understand within the realm of ageism, in many cases, it's impossible, especially if we're in the ageist community and you are in poor health. Finding work is going to be next to impossible. Also, if you don't have a skill or education, finding work is going to be next to impossible. The people who I know who are continuing to work in age 70 and beyond typically are highly experienced or highly skilled. A lot of therapists, for whatever reason, continue working after age 70. Financial advisors, wealth managers, accountants tend to continue working after age 70. Lawyers, some people in legal fields continue working after age 70. But you don't want to be doing potentially hard manual labor after age 70 for obvious reasons. The next thing, delaying Social Security. It's a double whammy when I meet someone who doesn't have anything saved for retirement and they're age 70, and they started taking their Social Security earlier. Maybe they started taking their Social Security at 67. In many cases, they were pushed out of the workplace in their early 60s due to injury, layoffs, and they actually started taking their Social Security at age 62. And I understand why they did it in the moment. They were in dire need of money and they were not getting hired, and there was no prospects of them getting hired. And it was offered to them and they took it. But it's often catastrophic because they needed the advanced figure that they were going to receive at age 70 in order to reasonably make a living. If you really have nothing saved for retirement, especially if you're like in your 60s, you're really getting in the wheelhouse of retirement. Please do not take your Social Security at age 62. Please don't plan on taking your Social Security at age 67. It really makes sense to wait to get the full Social Security plus and start taking that at age 70. So delay Social Security as long as possible. Do not take it early. Do not even take it at full retirement age. Work to as long as you can and try to take that Social Security at age 70. The next question is, can you relocate? I live in the San Francisco Bay Area and I've always worked as a financial advisor in this area. And of course, it's super expensive. It's one of the most expensive areas of the country. And if someone is committed to staying in the Bay Area, it's a very difficult prospect, even under the best of circumstances, to comfortably retire in the Bay Area. But oftentimes, if a person doesn't have access to resources, they have made peace with the fact that they are likely going to have to leave the San Francisco Bay Area. And so that's one of the questions. One of the first questions I ask is, are you willing to relocate? Now, if you were 70 with $0 in saving for retirement, wherever you're living, if it's a high cost of living area, are you willing to relocate to a lower cost of living area somewhere in the United States? That may be a much smaller city. It may be a more rural or suburban area with lower cost of living, lower housing, and lower expenses. I know since 2019 and the recent spate of inflation, that's become more relative. It seems like life pretty much everywhere in the United States has gotten expensive. And I have said for years that everywhere is going to be California soon. And it looks like my intuition is coming to pass. People all over the nation are getting the experience of what it's like to live in a high cost of living area because the United States has just become one big high cost of living area. That may be looking at opportunities for people who are 70 who have nothing saved for retirement to move abroad, maybe move to Mexico or a much lower cost of living country to make their Social Security stretch further. This person may have to get very creative in terms of where they live and where they want to live in order to make life happen if they want to retire at some point in the near future. And if they're working at age 70, they probably want to retire at some point in the near future. The next question I ask is, can they tap home equity? If the person has the good fortune of owning a home or largely owning a home, there is something called a reverse mortgage, and it's not something that I recommend lightly. There's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts with a reverse mortgage, and I'm not a reverse mortgage specialist. I always refer them to a reverse mortgage specialist to explain all the details associated with it. But basically, a reverse mortgage allows you to take the equity out of your house while you are alive versus waiting till you are deceased in order to sell that house. It's more complicated than that, but I've had a few cases where reverse mortgage really saved the day, especially here in the Bay Area where you have homes that could have millions of dollars of equity locked up in them. For some people, it made retirement possible. I can also tell you some stories where a reverse mortgage actually turned bad on people and the person ended up losing their house. But I can say that in the past 5 to 10 years, the regulations surrounding reverse mortgages have gotten a lot better. So you're seeing far few people get caught in these situations where they lose their house as a result of the reverse mortgage. So if you have a home and if you have equity in that home, is it possible for you to get a reverse mortgage to fund your retirement? The next thing I always talk about, leveraging government resources on things like food stamps, Medicaid, and subsidies. Oftentimes for impoverished seniors, there are programs available to help them in the form of food stamps, Medicaid, and subsidies. People say a person is 70, aren't they on Medicare? Yes, they are on Medicare, but there are some people who utilize both Medicare and Medicaid to basically have more comprehensive coverage. And if you meet certain income standards or certain age standards, that may be an option for you. It varies by state. It varies by local government, whether you are eligible for these programs, and eligibility requirements may change over time. I know it's very difficult for seniors who are low income because sometimes the requirements just change out of the blue and they were eligible one day and the next day they were not eligible. And that could be quite difficult when you are elderly and relying on those subsidies to live. But odds are, if you're living only on Social Security, you should be eligible at least for some subsidies to help you maintain your standard of living. I know all of that has been drawn into question with the passing of the Big Beautiful Bill, but these programs will be available to some extent, but the requirements for these programs will be much different than they were in the past. Next, we talked about cutting lifestyles, things like cutting out cable, cutting out added expenses. Oftentimes the person is 70 and has zero saved for retirement. They're living a pretty frugal lifestyle already. Essentially, we have to look at their budget and see what they can cut out. Sometimes there's nothing that they could cut out. Sometimes there is things that they can go through and cut out and change up. It's not a very fun lifestyle, right? It's not a very fun. It's cutting out things that may have been part of their lives for a very long time. Dining out with friends, cable television subscriptions that they have enjoyed. A lot of that just has to go in order to make ends meet. So the next one is consider taking a roommate or two. And this is controversial because most people don't want to live with someone when they are in their 70s. And I get it. I've lived with roommates and I've lived alone, and I prefer to live alone. But if you can bring in a roommate or two to help with living expenses and help with rent, that could be a way of really reducing your lifestyle expenditures and your monthly expenditures. I would say be very careful who you let in your house. If you have to do a background search, do a background check on the person. It's always better if it's a friend or family member or someone who is known to you in some capacity. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes people end up not living well with friends. But for safety and for sanity, typically if the person is known to you in somehow or some way, that can make things a little bit easier, a little bit better in transitioning into having a roommate. I would also have a conversation with the person about health. You don't want to provide long-term care for a roommate. And what if the person goes into a long-term care event or a situation? Does that person have a plan to transition out into a long-term care facility or have somewhere where they can get the level of support and care that they need? And I think it's important to spell upfront that your house can't provide the long-term care services that this person needs if they should go into a long-term care event. Health. Now, you're in your 70s, typically health begins to change up pretty rapidly. But if you have $0 saved for retirement at age 70, health is paramount. Health is like forefront. You have to keep your health together because you're going to be working. And like I said, there's already ageism in the workforce. If you're showing signs of not being healthy already, it's going to be very difficult to find any sort of work. You have to basically prioritize your health, and that's exercise, food, diet, environment to keep yourself healthy and as strong as humanly possible. Next is looking for subsidized senior housing. Now, this may be if you don't own your home or you had to sell your home. There are often in communities subsidized senior housing, and these apartments are not readily available. There's steep competition for these senior subsidized housing, and there's wait lists often years long to find subsidized senior housing. But if you're in your 60s and you know that there is a good chance you're going to end up with zero saved for retirement at age 70, you may want to put yourself on the list early. So, because it often takes 3 to 5 years in order for an apartment to open up, you also may not have a lot of choice in where you live or where the apartments open up. Here in the San Francisco area, we have senior housing communities. And once again, they have very long wait lists. Apartments very rarely open up. And when they do open up, they're snatched up immediately. So I wouldn't rely on subsidized senior housing to provide my housing in retirement or when I'm 70 and over. It's a very precarious position to be in, and the housing just may not be available. But it is a last resort for someone who doesn't have access to housing and has zero saved for retirement at age 70. Finally, number 10, and this one is tricky, can family help? And people are often very reluctant to accept help from family at this stage of life, but sometimes it just can't be helped. And children should not be relied on in any extent as a source of retirement or as a source of retirement income. Sometimes children can help, sometimes children can't. Even with living arrangements and living situations, I've had people move in with children only for the kid to get a job in New York City across the country 6 months later. And the person didn't want to move to New York City, but now was faced to moving New York City, and the kid really didn't want the parent to move to New York City. It wasn't an ideal situation, and they had to come up with an alternative solution that wasn't optimal, I think, for either party, but they didn't have a choice. But if you have a family member who can or will help, who may provide a room for you to live in for a few months to a year while you build up your savings, or can provide financial assistance. Maybe they can give you a few $100 a month. With the way things are economically in the United States, that's becoming more and more rare. So there you have it, a situation that no one wants to face, but there are Americans in the situation of having $0 saved for retirement at age 70. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you like and what you don't like. And if you found this information useful, please share and subscribe.